Amen. Hello again. It's good to be with you this, I guess this morning for you. For me, it's early evening. I'm glad to be with you. I think this is the 8th, 9th group I'm visiting in this series. I've been trying to teach somewhat the same every time. So I'm not sure if you've watched some of my presentations, the ones that I did before. I will, the beginning part of it will be similar to what I've done before. Today I might add some things to it that I haven't shared before. But I always start with referring to my first presentations, the presentations that I did in Germany. And it was in January. I did a 3-part series, and I presented a lot of details there. I did a lot of reading. It was a lot of history in a sense. Like I went some years. We looked at the Panium, Boston, Concord, and Exeter, the waymarks before the Sunday Law, and we looked into that history in regard to the Eastern Front, in regard to King of the North, King of the South, and I did quite a lot of reading. I'm not going to repeat that, so I hope I'm going to assume in the presentations today that you've watched those, that you've seen these presentations. I'm going to review it because it's been some time ago, so you may not remember all the details, but I will review that, and then I'll add a little bit to it, give some additional thoughts because the message has been developing the last few weeks and months. So also I have been thinking, and depending on the time, I think that will be part 1, and then we go straight into question answer, or we have a break and have a question answer session, whatever you prefer. That has been on my mind. So for so far so good. Are there any comments or questions?
It's good for us.
No. All right. So the line that I want to look at with you is the line that I presented in Germany. It's the line that leads from 2021 Panium to the Sunday Law and the waymarks in between. But before we go there, I want to zoom out a little bit and go to the bigger picture and to see the context of that dispensation, because 2021 to the Sunday Law is just a small part of a bigger story, and I want to go and look to the bigger story that is before that time period to have a little bit of more context. So that line starts in, hey, install my ruler. Oh, yeah. I'm having children. I want to start and look at. I want to start with 1989, the beginning of our line, the time of the end for our dispensation, for our history. So we're going to focus. Before I do that, actually, I want to add that, as you know, there's several Sunday Law. How do you say that? Sunday Law messages going around in the movement, and I happen to be one of those. The point is that I'm not my studies are not focusing on the Sunday Law. So people have questions towards me in regard to the Sunday Law, what I think of the Sunday Law, and how that would fit into what I'm teaching. In general, I'm not presenting on the on the subject of the Sunday Law. The Sunday Law subject is really Elder Terry. Elder Terry is dealing with what we call, you could call it Western Front. So it is the dealings within the United States. So the internal war that is going on within the United States, we call it Western Front. It's a term we can use to define that. Can you call civil war? But let's use Western Front. So she focuses on Western Front, the developments within the United States that all lead to the Sunday Law and further on. My presentations, they're focused on the Eastern Front, same time period, but Eastern Front. So Eastern Front is a study talking about the battles or the fights or the, for the right word, but the strife between the King of the North and the King of the South. There have been in battles for some time. We call that the Eastern Front. And the Eastern Front is my focus of attention. And so that's not Sunday Law, so that's not America internal. But of course, the stories or those lines or the events, they need to line up with each other in some way. Like I've said before that, for example, in 2001, we mark 9/11. It's an important event. We mark 9/11. But it doesn't, in 2001, we mark several other things as well. Like if you have, for example, the line or the story of LGBTQ, then there's an event in 2001 as well that is essential and that is significant for the story of LGBT happening in 2001, but that's not necessarily happening on the 11th of September. I think on the line of LGBT, that story, 2001 is the year where the first same-sex marriage was taking place, and I think it was in April. But it lines up at least within the year. So what I'm saying is that the story that I tell about Eastern Front needs to somewhat line up with the Western Front or with even other stories. So yeah, I wanted to address that my focus of attention is not the Sunday Law in itself, but indirectly it has consequences, or indirectly it is connected with the Sunday Law message and the Sunday Law line. So looking to the Eastern Front, the battles between the King of the North and the King of the South, we start that in 1989. So before 1989, we have two powers, the King of the South and the King of the North. And the King of the South comes to its end. We finally mark it here in 1991, where it really dies. And in this time period, we see the United States rise as a unipolar power, see unilateral power, I should say. And it starts to use that power, it starts to misuse that power. And it starts to police the world. It starts to rule the world as the only superpower. So then 2001 happens. We have many things happening, of course, but we mark 9/11 here. So 9/11 shows that America is actually vulnerable. So they start to rise as these unilateral powers, the only superpower in the world. Powerful, but 9/11 shows actually they are vulnerable, or you could say they're weak. So I'm going to say weak for the sake of this argument, but you could say vulnerable. The USA shows weakness. It is not so powerful as they are touch. How do you say that? They're not untouchable. So USA shows weakness or shows vulnerability. And then in 2003, with the whole aftermath of 9/11, George Bush wants to invade Iraq. Well, I think we all remember or know that story, but just in a nutshell, this invasion of Iraq is based on false information. So the USA tries to convince the world, and they do convince the world. No, well, they try to convince the world with information that uh, uh, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. They try to convince the world with satellite footage and information. I think the United Nations has always been said, no, you're not going into Iraq, but they did it anyway. They went together with the British into Iraq. Yeah, I think the British as well. Yeah, and they went into Iraq, and soon after this invasion, I think it was in the same year or maybe the next year, they realized that uh, Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction, and that the information that the USA had was incomplete or even false or wrong. And the world was astonished by this, how do you say, by this mistake, but also by the misuse of power that the USA um, that the USA used. And misuse of power, they don't use mispower. Well, anyway, you understand what I mean. So So those events, 9/11, but also especially here in Iraq, shows that the United States was vulnerable, and it lost its credibility. So you see that the United States loses its credibility in the world because they they went into Iraq against the rules, so to speak. The United Nations was against it. They went anyway, and later they found out that the information that they actually used as their argument to invade Iraq was actually wrong, false, incomplete. So the rest of the world was very defensive in the following years um, towards the United States and being the unilateral power, especially when it comes to intervening in other uh, in someone else's politics and in someone else's country. So that brings us to the story of the King of the South, because in this, well, I'm not saying it's a fall, but at least in this decrease of credibility, this loss of credibility and this showing of weakness and vulnerability, there is a vacuum, or there is some space, there is some room for other players to show up. And that's what we see happening in this time period, especially since Iraq, that we see Russia, but also China, um, rise into the world scene. So we're going to focus on Russia, and we see a rise of power. And we mark 2019 in general as which is rough, yeah, as the climax point or the high point for Russia's power. I think that's Elder Tess studies that where she goes through the year of 2019, where she says 2019 is the point where Russia has its and we have articles supporting that Russia was really part of the um, was considered part of being of world powers, a significant power, a significant world power. It had lots of spheres of influence. It was gaining power in other parts of the world. Not only like here in the 1989 time period, in the Cold War time period, the power or the influence that Russia had was in the neighboring countries, so to speak, like Ukraine or Poland or all the nations. It was a conglomerate. It was like uh, it was all together. Now here it is a worldwide empire, you could say. It is um, um, they have influence in Africa, in South America, in Asia, in Eastern Europe. Um, and 2019 is the high point of that power of the King of the South, of Russia. Russia rises into power, and Russia marks the high point of that. So we're like here at the same point as it was here. Now we have those bilingual, or not bilingual. Um, is it bilateral? Bilateral power where Russia, but yeah, I guess China is in the scene as well, but together with Russia. Um, so we see Russia rise, we see the USA fall in credibility, losing. Of course, it's still a superpower, but it lost credibility and some of its power. And that brings us all to 2021. So 2021 is the beginning point where I want to focus on, or where I want to start. But I want to show the dilemma that Joe Biden was in 2021. 2021, Joe Biden is confronted with information about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. There was no, of course, 2014, Russia already invaded the Crimea, but now there was another military buildup taking place in 2021 at the Ukrainian border. And in the end of this year, Joe Biden receives information from his intelligence services that the military buildup is serious and Putin is making war plans. And those plans, this invasion, the plans for those invasions were serious. Putin was planning a big invasion. It was an invasion of Kiev and an invasion of eastern Ukraine, a twofold invasion. So taking Kiev and topple the government in Ukraine, and also take a big chunk of Ukraine, the eastern part, and annex it into Russia. That was the plan. And in October 2021, Biden receives that information that it's that serious, and that something needs to be done. Or well, that's the dilemma that Joe Biden was in, because the problem that Joe Biden had is this. It's it's twofold. It is the USA lost its credibility. In all those years, it's almost 2 decades where America did not seriously intervene in wars or take down other governments or start a war even. And in 2014, for example, Barack Obama had information about Russia uh, going into Crimea, but it was quiet. Nothing happens. Barack Obama doesn't dare to intervene, doesn't dare to share information when he had it, because America was not a trustworthy partner, because they shared information in the past and it was all wrong, and it turned out all to be to work against the United States, so to speak. By sharing the information, in the end, it all worked against themselves. So Barack Obama decided not to share information, not to intervene, didn't do anything. So Biden now is in the same dilemma. He has a lot of information now. He realizes that this is serious. Putin is going to invade Ukraine. Now what? he can share that information with the rest of the world, but the rest of the world is probably going to do, well, we don't believe you. We're not going to take this serious. We know what you did in Iraq. You want to intervene here as well. So that was his first problem, his credibility. And the second one is, in this time period, the rise of the King of the South was not only in spheres of influence in like Cuba or Venezuela or in Africa. The King of the South, Russia, gained a lot of influence and, how do you say that? Well, yeah, gained a lot of influence in Western countries, like in Europe. The Germans did business, the French did business, whole Europe did business with Putin. Putin was creating the narrative that Russia wasn't so bad as they were before, that they were a trustworthy, democratic country, a partner you can deal with, a partner you can do business with. To such a degree that in this time period within NATO, there was there were states, there were public discussions of whether NATO was even still, was there still a reason for NATO to exist? Because NATO was, of course, started as a defense of the Western allies against Russia or the USSR. And now you have Russia and Putin, Russia, were creating this narrative that Russia wasn't so evil, that it was a trustworthy partner. So NATO was really divided on how to deal with Russia. There was no they were not united at all on this subject. That was all the information. It was all because of the information warfare that Putin had shared with the world in this history. So that was the second problem that Biden needed to deal with, is that nobody would believe him if he says Putin is evil and is going to invade and does such a great invasion, such an evil thing. The rest of the world, even the American allies, the nations in Europe, for example, they had some sympathy for Putin. They thought you could talk with Putin and was a reasonable person. And in July, Biden realized we cannot, Putin is not a reasonable person. You cannot talk with him. He is serious. The information that we have shows us that he is preparing this war. This is real. They're going to invade and it's going to be big and serious. But America lost credibility and Putin gained credibility in this time period. So Biden says now what? He can do the same thing as Barack Obama, do nothing, and then, well, you don't lose anything either. At least um, you're not sharing lies. But at the same time, he was like, we need to do something. So Joe Biden decides here in October 2021, we're going to take the lead in this, where Russia was always in the lead when it comes to information warfare, when it's about the narrative that is shared. Putin was really good in um, Putin was really good in bringing a narrative and convincing the rest of the world that the narrative that he shares was the true story. And he gained in credibility. The USA was losing its credibility, and Biden decided, no, we need to take back our position. We need to take control of the situation. We are going to fight against Russia. I'm going to share this information that I have. I'm going to try and convince the rest of the world and my allies that we need to intervene, that we need to do something here in Ukraine. And I think this position, or sorry, no, this decision that Biden took was a crucial and the important decision of Panium. I think that is what we describe as Panium. If there's one moment that describes Panium, I think it's this decision, that Joe Biden takes a decision to do something and to change the narrative of and to change Putin's narrative, and now change it into the story that Biden wants to tell. So Biden is going to convince the world we cannot don't trust Putin. He is a liar, because Putin here was saying, no, this is all military, this military buildup. No, it's only training. We only do military training. It's all okay. Don't worry. And Biden said, don't believe him. He's going to invade. This is going to be serious. And now the allies are going to, they don't believe Biden. I shared a lot of information about this, about the details of this waymark, what the information was, what allies believed, who didn't, the whole, all the details. I shared that in Germany. I'm not going to repeat that. I wanted to give this prelude, so to speak, before we go to 2021, because here we have 2021. Starting in February, where the conflict between the King of the North and the King of the South starts. And it leads you to October. Oh, I always do the K. That's not English, that's Dutch. October. So October is the climax point. This is the point where Biden takes this decision to, I always say, he takes the crown, or he takes the position. Well, this is a very bad crown, but anyway, he takes the throne, so to speak. This marks the beginning of a rise as a unilateral power. And it also marks the beginning of the fall of the King of the South, because where the King of the South was in control and in the lead when it's about talking about information warfare, 2021 flips this around. The USA says, no, we're taking control of the situation, and we're going to dominate the narrative now. And this is where we see the USA starts to rise. I mark this as the beginning of the rise of the unilateral power. We mark it also as the beginning of the Seventh Kingdom. I know that this is actually Joe Biden and not Trump or Trumpism. But even Biden, even the mindset of Biden here, it's also kind of like an ideology, is we're going to control the situation, we're going to intervene, we are going to dominate this, we are going to restore unilateral power. Although maybe that wasn't the mindset or even the idea of it was all focused on Ukraine and we want to help Ukraine. The effect is that you take a unilateral position against Russia, and you're going to flip it around and say, like, we are taking control of the situation. And I'm saying this marks the beginning of taking the throne or taking the crown as the unilateral power. Of course, this needs to develop into what we call national Sunday law, worldwide Sunday law. But 2021 marks the beginning of that. And at the same time, also the fall of the King of the South. We're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss it here. But I wanted to look at 2021 and the history before that to understand it better. So February, we see that the United States starts to poke Russia in the eye and starts to irritate it, and Russia responds. So the King of the North starts this battle the king of the north, starts this battle against the king of the south, and it's the king of the north that succeeds, or that wins the battle. This is actually, it's not Panium. In this story, it's Beneventum, which is same waymark, but a different story. So Beneventum, it's the story of what we call Pyrrhus. So this is Beneventum. And Beneventum was a battle which was instigated by the king of the north. And it was also won by the king of the north. So Pyrrhus loses this battle. This is the last battle of Pyrrhus in Italy. After this battle, he goes back to Epirus, and he never returns in Italy. Which brings us to the next waymark, 2022. So the problem of Joe Biden is that the world doesn't believe him. So we also call this Boston, and this is Concord. This is Exeter. So it is in 2021. Well, let me also write down. This is the waymark. This is the waymark that Elder Tess described as the waymark 273. You remember the study of X27? The study of X27 brought her to 273 BC, which is this waymark. It was the waymark between Panium and the Sunday law. And she said 273 marked Concord, the Concord waymark between those two bigger waymarks. So I'm saying 273 or Concord is this waymark. In 2020, so yeah, in 2022, we marked the invasion, the actual invasion that took place. Oh, sorry, before I go there, 273. Well, what happened in 273? In 273, Elder Tess marked several things, or actually one thing is that Egypt sends ambassadors to Rome. So in that story, Rome was the king of the north. Rome had just defeated Pyrrhus here at this waymark. So because of Beneventum, Egypt hears the news about the defeat of Pyrrhus at Beneventum, and Egypt now realizes, oh, this Rome, which was a very small, until that time insignificant power, defeated Pyrrhus, and Pyrrhus was not so insignificant. Pyrrhus was a famous and strong warrior, and when Egypt realized that Pyrrhus was defeated by Rome, they realized, oh, we need to do something. We need to be in contact with Rome. We need to have established diplomatic relations with this power. So they sent ambassadors to Rome, basically to ask, do you want to start diplomatic relations with us? And then later the Romans sent ambassadors to Egypt. But 273 marks the year where Egypt sends their ambassadors to Rome. That's what Elder Tess spotted. And that brought her to the story of Beneventum. And she realized, oh, there is a Sunday law waymark. There were some characteristics that she marked here as well. I'm not going into the details of the whole story. But 273, the 273 waymark, or the story of that waymark, is connected with the previous one. So what I've been suggesting is that in 2022, in February, we mark the beginning of this invasion. The invasion that was of course, the military buildup. We all Biden warned about it, and now it actually happened. The rest of the world did not believe Biden. The rest of the world never, until the day of the invasion, even the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian leaders didn't believe that it would happen. Although Biden has been, and the American administration has been repeatedly warning the world and warning the Ukrainians, this is going to happen and it's going to be this big. Those details are going to happen. And actually never really, nobody actually never believed them. And then February hits, and now the whole Western world comes into concord. They realize, oh, Biden was right. And they give credits to what Biden did here because they realized, oh, he was right. Uh, he dominated the narrative, and it was the correct narrative. He won this information warfare. So I'm saying February, the invasion. I'm going to mark the 21st of February, and I'm going to mark the 25th of February. The 21st is where Putin declares the eastern provinces of Ukraine as independent states. So he says those provinces of Ukraine, they actually don't belong to Ukraine. They are independent states. That happens on the February 21st. So nobody really takes that serious and say like, well, that doesn't make sense. But for Putin, that was important. He declares those provinces as independent states. And then on the 24th, 3 days later, he invades those states. This invasion is twofold. Like I said, they go into those provinces in the eastern and the southeastern border of Ukraine. But another part, the invasion was in the north. They went through Belarus into the north, and they invaded Kiev. Oh, sorry, they wanted to invade Kiev. They invaded Ukraine to take Kiev. That invasion failed already in the early days, just a few weeks, I think. It took 3 to 4 weeks. And then the Russians realized they were not succeeding. They pulled back, and all the troops went now to the Eastern Front, and they continued the war there. So the 21st, I'm going to write down here. The 21st is a declaration of independence of those provinces, and I think it's also called the Donbas region. So in the Declaration of Independence of the Donbas region. Then you have the 25th. So I skip over the 24th. The 24th is the invasion. The 25th is where the world is shocked and they come together. NATO comes together. First of all, NATO comes together in an online summit. They all come together in a what's the word? Well, in an online summit. And high emergency, something like that. I don't know what you call it. And suddenly, whole NATO is united. They say, we need to do something here. This is wrong. And suddenly everybody realized that Russia wasn't such a trustworthy partner. And so NATO was suddenly completely united on this subject. And the other part is where the United Nations Security Council comes to, wrong color. The United Nations Security Council comes together to vote on a resolution. So we have the United Nations Security Council. I already write it down. Russia vetoes the resolution. I'll explain that a little bit. On the 25th, the United Nations Security Council comes together. The Security Council is a council within the United Nations that comes together when there is significant security issues taking place in the world, like invasions or war or terrorism. And this commission, this council comes together. They talk about it and they have a vote whether the United Nations should intervene, should have a position on it or not, and what the position is, etc. So here on the 25th, they come together and the resolution says Russia should immediately pull back their military forces out of Ukraine and this invasion should stop. It is an illegal invasion and it's incorrect to do it. The Security Council consists out of 15 states. 5 of them are oh, I see something's happening in my screen when I pull up my hand. Sorry, I was distracted. 5 of those people, 5 of those states are permanent members. 10 of them are members that rotate every 1 or a second year. And those 5 member states are permanent members. So the 5 permanent member states are the United States and Russia. You have France, UK, and China. So these are the 5. And those 5 member states have veto power. So if there's a resolution and one of those 5 member states votes against this resolution, the resolution will not be adopted. It will not be accepted. According to the rules, there's one rule where when a state is part of the conflict, this state is not allowed to vote. So in this case, Russia is part of the conflict here. Russia is, this resolution is actually about actions that Russia does. So according to the rules, Russia is not allowed to vote. And so that is in the United Nations Charter. So the United Nations Charter is basically the constitution of the United Nations. This is where all the rules and how the United Nations operates, it's all described in this charter. So it has different articles. So you have Article 27. Article 27 that deals with the voting system within the United Nations Security Council. And the Security Council comes together when there's a security issue. And when there is a security issue and there is a resolution, the 5 member states have veto power, the other ones not. If a state is involved in the conflict, this state is not allowed to vote, should not vote, is abstained from voting. So, especially this last part, the voting part, the veto power and this exception on the rule is all in Article 27.3. So you have a 273 here, which I thought was interesting at the beginning of Concord. So the world comes into Concord. Russia stands up, breaks rule 27.3, which doesn't really matter because the world stands up against it anyway. But it's a symbolic. You can also see the dysfunctioning of the United Nations here, by the way, but it's a different story. Especially the Security Council here is not working properly. The breaking of this rule, by the way, is not something new. This has been done in history for many times by different powers. Also, America has done this in the past, for example, in Vietnam, or I think even Iraq, where they have misused their veto powers in conflicts they actually were participating themselves. And that is actually the problem. This rule has been ignored from the beginning, since the beginning of the United Nations. And you can really see that the United Nations, as they move forward, are losing grip and losing actually significant power. It has never been, I don't know if I worded it correctly, but it has never been a powerful institute, because it's not it's not the decisions they make at the Security Council, for example, are not binding. States can just put those things next to them and just continue. There's nobody that says thou shalt do this, and if you don't, you will be persecuted for it. No, there are not binding resolutions, they're not binding decisions. And it becomes even weaker if you start breaking your own rules. And that has been done from the beginning. So the United Nations and the Security Council are really showing their weakness here as well. But that's just a side note. So I want to go to the end of this. I want to bookend those waymarks. Starts in February, where they come into Concord. I want to go to the 30th of September. There's two things happening, the 30th and the 30th. The first one is, before I go there, so we are now about half a year in this invasion, and Putin actually, and the security agents of Putin, they actually calculated or expected this invasion to be very short. They actually planned to go into Kiev in a few days. That was their plan, to invade Ukraine from the north, just walk into Ukraine and topple the Ukrainian government in a few days. That was the planning, 3-4 days. It became 4 or 5 weeks, and after that they decided, okay, we'll leave that part. They pulled back, and then they went into the Eastern Front. And actually, the original idea was that the Eastern Front, the Eastern Front is confusing, but the Eastern invasion of East and Southeast Ukraine, they expected to take that part of Ukraine in a few weeks, but it took months. And after a few months, in August, the Ukrainians started counter-offensive, because since February, Russia was gaining a lot of territory every day, and they took cities and destroyed it, and they moved forward. And the Ukrainians were surprised, of course, and at the same time defending itself. But the Russians were steadily taking territory, winning territory. And then in August, a counter-offensive starts. And now suddenly we see Ukraine gaining and winning territory back. They win big cities back. I think it is in September, and in November they take those cities, Kharkiv and Kherson. I think there's significant cities, or I think even the second biggest city in Ukraine. They take those cities back from the Russians, and now Putin starts to scratch his head and think like, this is not going to according plan. We should have finished this weeks ago, and now even the Ukrainians are taking things back from us. This is a nightmare. So to save his face, Putin celebrates a big party in Moscow. So what he says on September the 30th, which is in the middle of the counter-offensive of the Ukrainians, and Russia is actually losing territory every day, Putin says, I'm declaring those independent states, those states that I declared independent, I annexed them now into Russia. So they are now officially Russian territory. So if you are in Russia right now and you go to schools, for example, and you see a map of Russia, those Ukrainian provinces are just added to it. You don't. This is what the border is at those provinces. So all those cities, this is the picture of Russia in Russia. Russia contains of including those 3 provinces. Reality is actually that here on the 30th and even until today, Russia doesn't even own that territory. Only half of those provinces perhaps belong at the moment within this war is territory that is ruled by the Russians at the moment, but the other parts of the provinces are still controlled by the Ukrainians. So this annexation takes place, and I think there were referenda also taking place in the days before, which were obviously not they were not done in a correct way, and that's why the United Nations Security Council comes together again and says that those referenda and also this annexation is illegal, and then Russia vetoes the resolution again. They break Article 27.3. And if that was not enough, September the 30th was the 273rd day of that year. Well, there's a couple of 273s here. There is a Concord here. And we see the connection with Benevento. We see the connection with 2021. Here, the rest of the world realizes that Biden was actually right when he said here, where he defeated Russia. Nobody realized it when he defeated it. They realized it here. Egypt heard about the defeat here, and that's why they sent ambassadors to Rome. They heard it here. They realized it here. What happened here? So I think all the connections are there. The world comes into concord. We see 273s all over the place. I think this is for the Eastern Front a solid waymark. This is only the story. I repeat what I said, but this is only the story of the Eastern Front. So I'm not doing away with other events like the overturning of Roe v. Wade in Dobbs v. Jackson, or other events that you can connect to this waymark. For example, that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is not part of the Eastern Front. It's not part of the King of the North versus King of the South. It's part of another story. So if you want to tell the story of internal America, well, then you take that part. You take the overturning of Roe v. Wade here. But that's part of another story. We're telling the story of the King of the North and the King of the South here. So moving forward to the next waymark. Oh, another thing that happens here actually. So a concord is also an increase of knowledge. So an increase of knowledge is, I think we've said that in the past as well, is where you have all the information. All the information is available to know what the issue is about. And so I know that is internal, and I know it is internal movement, or Millerite history. When you go to 1818, in 1818, William Miller had all the information he needed. It was only not formalized yet, and it needed to be fulfilled. But everything was available here. In the time period of Jeff Pippinger, here in 1991 to 1993, the increase of knowledge time period, the line upon line studying, all the information was there, all the methodology was there. It needed only to be formalized here with the magazine on Daniel 11. But all the information, all the methodology was prepared in this history. So I know that is internal, but it is a characteristic that belongs to an increase of knowledge. And I think that you can apply that to external events as well. In this case, I think you can say Putin here. Well, let me say this. Here at Beneventum, Putin he loses the battle. Beneventum is this information warfare. He loses the battle, but it also marks the beginning of his downfall, a downfall towards complete death. And I think here we can see the problem. You can't see the death here. So in Boston, a Boston is always invisible. The issue is not really there. It was difficult to see. Even the rest of the world didn't see it. Biden was the only one that saw it. Nobody else basically saw it. Now here in 2022, everybody saw it. Everybody realized, oh, now this is going on. Now we realize what is going on. And at the same time, we also see the problem that Putin is in. Because Putin brought himself here in September, he realized that he was in big trouble because he actually anticipated a war that took place a few weeks max. Invasion, boom, done. And it took months and months and months. And now he was even losing territory. And since this time, actually, you could argue that since September or this time period at the end of 2022, you could argue there is a stalemate. So even until today, so 2025, right now, compared to what the situation in the war here in this time period, not much changed. There's like a stalemate. Like, of course, there's perhaps a little bit of gaining territory, winning of territory, losing of territory. It goes a little back and forth. And at the moment, you hear the information that Russia is winning some of its some territory back, but it's going back and forth this way. It's not a big significant change since this time period, and that's the problem of Putin. Putin has a problem, and it needs to be solved. He needs to come out of this war as a winner, and there's only one way to do it. There's only one entity that can help and solve this problem, and we know that is the King of the North. And that's at the same time also Putin's problem, because that is going to cause, because if your greatest opponent, if you need the help of your greatest opponent, well, then you're a loser, right? In terms of warfare. If you're in a fight with somebody and in the end the person you're fighting with needs to help you because you're stuck with your foot in somewhere, 15 minutes, you are well, you're a loser. So the King of the North is going to help the King of the South out of this mess. And I'm suggesting, or I was suggesting here in January, where I presented for the first time, I said, this is 2024, July to November. This is where the King of the North contacts the King of the South. The King of the North asks Putin, we want to offer you help. Are you open for help? And Putin says, yes, I'm open for help. And they said, okay, wait for next year. And then we're going to fix this. We're going to fix this problem for you. And so next year is 2025. And in February, we now know that actually this process of negotiations, of talking with each other started, and it's still taking place at the moment. It's has been quite a roller coaster time period. Also in regard to this, we've seen Zelensky in the White House and stuff like that. It has been quite hectic, but February was the beginning of it. And we don't know how that and what time, how long that will take. So this was my initial study in January. We know now, of course, that the message has been developing. We also know, before I go there, in January, I presented this also knowing that that there was another study, Elder Terry's study primarily, was dealing with the Western Front and was marking this period from July to November as actually the Sunday law time period. So I was, while presenting this, I was a little bit in a, how do you say that? I opposed, so to speak, the idea of having a Sunday law in 2024. I suggested it is actually 2025. So that's why my study became a Sunday law message as well. As I said, I'm not talking about the Sunday law, but because the structure of my line, the Eastern Front here in this case, was not in line with Elder Terry's study. Well, there was a debate, I guess, or a question. What is the Sunday law? Okay. So I've been thinking as well, because my suggestion was, should this July to November 2024 not be in Exeter? Is it not the perfect Exeter? Because one of the characteristics that I mentioned here for an Exeter, and for every Exeter actually, is I suggested that every Exeter is a mini version of the real thing that is going to happen here. I gave some examples for that in my previous presentations in Germany. I think also Elder Perminder at the ICM has suggested that you cannot have a Sunday law with a loud screaming Exeter, because at Exeter, why do people at the loud cry, for example, why do the people at the loud cry, which is an Exeter, why do they cry? Well, the conclusion was, at least that's what I got from it, is that at the ICM, the International Camp Meeting in France last year, is that why do people at the loud cry is because of what they see happening in the world right now. So when they see at Exeter, they look at Exeter at that time period to the world, they actually see things happening, and they realize, and now they understand what is going to happen. They see it already happening here, and that's why it's going to happen here also, but then bigger or more decisive. But the things that they expect to happen here, they already see happening here, and that's why they start to cry. They're like, it actually happens here. Babylon is fallen. It is fallen, but they know it's fallen here. So they cry because of the things they see happening right then and there. So that's why I've been saying, I guess you can word it differently, but I call it mini version. So what you see happening here is in small what is actually going to expect here. You can see that on different waymarks as well if you go back in our on our line. So what you see here from July to November is a process of the King of the North starting to negotiate with Putin. But it was Trump not being in power, was not able to do something significant, but he was not even a president back then. In November, 2 days after his election, he called with Putin and said, like, hey, wait for January, and we're going to fix this. So that started, and that process started in February. So that's why I said this is a mini version, the beginning of those negotiations, and now the real thing is going to happen here. That has been my logic. So yeah, I think I'll do that here at the end instead of at the beginning for next. But so I have been developing and see the things happening in the movement right now as well. And especially Elder Terry's presentations have been developing a lot. And she has been giving evidence after evidence, building up her, making her story more solid, that I have been thinking that July 18 or July is actually Sunday law. I've never stated this publicly, so this is the first time. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I can see for some weeks already the setting up of the image in July. So I go back to Western Front at the moment, Elder Terry's study. For some time, of course, I recognize the setting up of the image in July. I can see the development of the Republican Party since 2012, 2014, until July last year, where it is all finished. It's purged. The Republican Party is completely changed. And I think it was the last presentation of Elder Terry last week, where she compared it with the Daily, and the Daily need to be taken away and be lifted up at the same time. I thought it was a very powerful presentation. And she brought that into application to the Republican Party. The Republican Party needed to be taken away and at the same time be lifted up. And that was the transition from into the Seventh Kingdom. And so I see that the only problem that I had so far was always, but in July there's no power. The Republican Party does not have any power. Theoretically, in November, you could have a Democratic president with a Democratic Congress and a Democratic Senate. Well, then you have a Democratic administration with a majority of Democrats in the House and in the Senate. And then you can have like an image of the beast set up in the Republican Party, but it cannot do anything. So theoretically, so that's theoretically speaking, of course, in July, there was not much going on in regards to the control of the United Nations, the control that the Republican Party had over the Institute or over the United States. So that has always been my problem. Like, shouldn't it be January 2025 then? Because this is where you can see the image being alive and do something. It took me some time, but I think I get it. Is that 2020? So July 18 or the events of July show you are at the same time the end of a story. So they show you the setting up of an image. So since 2014, or I actually prefer to mark 2012, but you can mark 2014 to July 2024. You can see the setting up of the image. It's one story. It's the purging of the Republican Party. In 2024, July 2024, it's done and dusted. It's the end of the story. If that's Sunday law, then it's also the beginning of the story. So if we mark that and say like, okay, this is National Sunday law, it's also the beginning, and then it's also a Boston. And like I said, a Boston is the characteristics of it. So the Boston is the beginning of a new story. So this new story, the beginning of it, you can't really see it. Maybe you understand it, what is going to happen, but you can't really see it there. So in July 2024, you can't really see it. It's not there. You need to go to the next waymarks to understand that, oh, here you can see it. Like the world could see it here. We could see it here. You couldn't see it here. Talking about the King of the North and the King of the South. So July 2024 marks the beginning of something that you can't see at that time. It needs to develop into something, and there comes a point of time. There comes a point in time where you can see it and can understand it. So that's I've been said I've been saying that before. I'm usually very slow in understanding things, and one of the latest accepting things. I think the arguments that I used have been arguments for months already, and Elder Terry has been saying that for a long time. I guess it starts to click for me now. Um, so so that's Western Front. I start seeing those things, and I start to realize, and also the way Elder Terry has been solidifying, is that a word? Her study, it becomes more concrete, more solid. It's not just one little study. It's actually a series of studies. It's a good structure at the moment that I don't think you can change it. And so that's my dilemma. I can see the Western Front developing in that way, also in that speed. Elder Terry has been introducing studies after study, line after line, in a similar pace as Elder Test did in the past. That you think like, well, this is supernatural. Who am I to think that my study, which isn't very much developing, is actually the one that we should listen to? And it's even not talking about the Western Front. So I see Western Front developing. I see it developing as a truthful message, but still having my conflict with this line. And at the moment, I'm not able to resolve. I have some thoughts, but how to resolve the issue in regard to the Eastern Front. I know Elder Terry has been suggesting, of course, because what I did here, when I presented this in January, I presented this as being the downfall of the King of the South, where the death of the King of the South took place here. That was my initial study, because we marked the death of the King of the South at the Sunday Law. Elder Terry has introduced, um, in her studies, I think she introduced it in Fiji in February, that the death of the King of the South is not actually not taking place at the National Sunday Law, but at the Worldwide Sunday Law. So, Worldwide Sunday Law, this death is actually taking place here. Well, it took me a little bit, but I already publicly I've said I believe that is true. I believe I can see that, but it doesn't resolve my problem, because I still have an Exeter here that is saying something about this waymark. I still have a Concord, and I have a Boston, a Concord, and an Exeter. And now I suddenly moved my last waymark all the way to the future. So what is happening here? And what does this say? And if this is actually, if I have to move now July to here and this one there, then I have an empty Exeter. So what is my Exeter now? And up to this time, I don't know. But one thing I've learned in this movement in the many years, or in the years that I have been around, is that you can accept a doctrine, you can accept a truth, not having all the information, not completely understanding it. I've done it in the past several times, where you think like, I know this is true, although I don't completely understand it, but I trust that I will understand it in the future. And I'm here right now as well. So I understand that the Western Front story of Elder Terry is true. I have a lot of questions also about the Western Front, but also about the Eastern Front now again. I don't completely understand all of it, but I have enough evidence to know that I need to go forward with uh, the Western Front this way. I'm sorry. Do I have power? Yeah. Um, so I think it would be good to leave it here. We started with the story of the prelude of 2021, where America lost its credibility. Russia gained credibility in the world. And that was a dilemma in 2021 for Biden. But Biden took the challenge and took back the position, took back control of the situation, fought against the King of the South in winning the narrative, trying to convince the world. And the rest of the world came in concord here in 2022. We now see the development of this war, and as we watch the news right now, I've been saying in January, I said 2024, July to November 2024 is Exeter, 2025 is Sunday law. I changed that position because watching the Western Front, the message on the Western Front developing, I think there is the foundation, there is a foundation laid that I should trust and follow, not seeing completely the at the moment I don't see the solution yet for this line. There's questions I have also as the Western Front, but also here on the Eastern Front. But I have enough evidence to move forward, and we'll see how this develops. I have some thoughts, but not concrete enough to make it a presentation. I think I'll leave it here for now, and maybe we can have a discussion in our second part. That's okay. Let's close with prayer. Dear Lord, I want to thank you for this opportunity studying with my Canadian friends. We're not done yet. I was able to lay out the line of the Eastern Front and share the information that I got through my personal studies. I could also share my personal experience and my personal route, so to speak, that I have taken in the last weeks. And I pray, Lord, that the study that we've done this morning so far may be a blessing to others as well. I pray that it may contribute to a better understanding of who you are and how your kingdom operates. Because in the end, Lord, that is what all those studies need to do. That while studying all those evil worldly kingdoms, that we get a better understanding of what actually true righteousness is and how your kingdom operates. I pray that we will be able to recognize that and see that also through these studies. I thank you for being with my Canadian friends, and I pray that you continue to bless us as we study later for a second part. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen.